I'm Nancy Dalton with the Tennessee Overhill, and I just want to welcome you here tonight, along with our director, Adrian Lambert, to this beautiful historical building, the Gym Theater. This beautiful building was built in 1906, and it has much history of it on. We could teach a whole class on the history of this building. But anyway, this is the last night of our series, Gems of the Past, that the Tennessee Overhill has been putting on since July of this year. We've put on one every month. This is the last, but we will have another series next year, starting in 2026. In the summer, we'll have a whole new series. I want to thank, of course, the Overhill and the city of Etowah for allowing us to do this lecture series. It takes a lot of effort to put this on. I want to thank Lamont Rose, which is the house manager of the Gym Theater, and also the director and manager of the Gym Players. And this is home to the Gym Players. And I also like to thank our technical people, Josh and Ruth, upstairs there, trying to do the sound, and we're going to try to start recording these. It takes a lot of work on their effort to make this possible. I have a couple of quick announcements. Next door is our art gallery, and the city of Etowah has turned the art gallery over to the Overhill for the last year and a half. And we're starting this Friday. We will be having the photography and art of Durant Tulloch. And that's going to be so exciting. It's just now being hung tonight. And there's going to be a reception on November the 14th. That's a Saturday from 11 to 2. So mark your calendars and also keep checking the Overhill Facebook page. It will be on there, and I'll probably put it in the morning facts too. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And thanks to his wife, Sandra Tulloch Marvin, for allowing us to put this on. Also, starting this Friday, November the 5th, we're starting again with our Off the Rail concerts. And we're going to be doing one every Friday, the first 3 Fridays of November. And we're going to be starting off with Skyway 61. And you can pick one of these flyers up. If you didn't pick it up when you walked in, that there'll be some out in the lobby there. So pick this up, and it's going to be a lot of fun. November 7th, 14th, and 21st, free concerts put on by the Overhill. Well, our Sheriff Joe Guy doesn't need any introduction in Southeast Tennessee, of course, but he's an author and our historian, but there's a few things you might not know about him. His descendants moved to McMinn County in the area of Berger Branch community in northern McMinn County in 1830, and his ancestors stayed here in the county all those years. They never left. And of course, Joe and his family still live here. As a boy, instead of out playing with his peers, his favorite thing was to sit at the foot of his grandparents and some of the older people he knew and listen to their fascinating stories of the past and things that they knew. And he just absorbed all that in. And as a young boy, he collected Native American artifacts and rocks, and he used to keep them in a box under his bed. And he would take them out and hold them in his hand and say, I wonder what they used this for, what they were felt when they were holding these, and what they did with it. So that started his love for history. But he's a storyteller at heart, and he began to write down all these stories that his grandparents told him, because he didn't want to forget a thing. And he wanted to hear about the tragedies and the heroes. He wanted to hear every bit of the history. And it never ceased to amaze him how people today in our society have fundamentally the same, they do the same mistakes and repeat the same things as people did many years ago in history. So it's so important that we keep our history alive, because it does repeat itself, because the personalities of people remain the same. He has spent hours roaming the hills and graveyards and abandoned buildings in McMinn County and the surrounding areas. And myself and Adrian and I have been fortunate enough that he has given us tours of some of the graveyards and abandoned places. And he take us there and tell us these stories, and it just came from his heart, you know. He has written 9 books in all nonfiction about our fabulous area. For some reason, my favorite, and I love them all, but my favorite is The Hidden History of Southeast Tennessee, and I'll often use it in references when I'm writing a story or trying to tell something. He is 3rd generation a police officer. His grandfather was a well-known officer in Etowah, and his dad was deputy sheriff and worked for the Athens Police Department. So it was just inevitable that he would follow in their footsteps. But as we said, he kept writing down his stories, and initially he wrote them in a column for the Daily Post-Athenian, and from there they grew into his books. He said that his research in the history of our area has helped him know how to deal with the people of today. He really knows our families. He knows everything about most of us in this room. You wouldn't even believe what he knows. And this helps him to service this area and to be a better sheriff. And he said he would never want to be a sheriff in any other place but our beautiful McMinn County. So that's enough of my voice. So let's give a great McMinn County welcome to our very own Sheriff Joe Guy.
Nancy always gives the best introductions. I was starting to get a little worried there. She's going to uncover that part where she said that I'll wander around in my line of work. We call that trespassing. Sometimes it pays off. So thank you all. Thank you all for having me. What a great series this has been up until this point tonight. It's been great. I've been very humbled to be a part of it. Some really great historians and speakers throughout this whole session. A lot of things going on in Overhill, but this has really been special. I think that it's been very well attended, and even mine were fairly well attended. So I appreciate that. But we've had some really, really great presenters, and I know that I've learned a lot just by coming and hearing some of these. So tonight, I'm going to talk about, as you can see, the Jack Walker murder and how that relates to the Cherokee removal. So the removal of the Trail of Tears, sometimes we think that's just something that happened. That Andrew Jackson wanted it that way and it just happened. And he was a driving force behind that. He was not the only president that was pushing that. It was discussed, I know, at least as early as Thomas Jefferson had made some efforts with the Native Americans to encourage them to remove out west on their own. But it was Jackson that really put that into play. But a lot of interesting things came together to make that happen when it did. And was a volcano. Have you heard that story? So there was a volcano that erupted in 1815 in what is today Indonesia. It is the largest volcano eruption in modern history that's ever been recorded. I think 50 times as powerful as Mount St. Helens. And it put enough dust and debris and gas into the atmosphere that that was in 1850. In 1816, there is recorded, that was called the year without a summer because it stayed cold. It actually snowed in New York in June of 1816. It was so cold. It started in 1816, and for several more years, it was so cold and so overcast that crops failed. And some of the crops that failed were the Cherokees' crops. And this is even mentioned in the removal treaty, the Etowah Treaty in 1835-36, because that was a significant thing that happened. It led to the Cherokees having to go to the federal government and purchase corn just to be able to survive. And that's sometimes called the corn debt. And that was one of the factors that the federal government, one of the cards they played, so to speak, in the negotiations to get the Cherokees to sign the removal agreement. So a volcano, literally on the other side of the world, had something to do with the Trail of Tears and so did this case. So did this murder. This incident happened. It didn't necessarily have anything directly to do with the Trail of Tears, but the fallout from it, and the murder itself is pretty interesting, but the fallout from it, very much like that volcano, ultimately opened some doors and laid some groundwork, some legal groundwork for the Trail of Tears to take place. And so I'll kind of run through this story with you. And we're going to probably skip through a couple slides because I've added to this as I've been asked to do other programs, and so I've added some things to it that we might just kind of skip through. But I did want to talk about Calhoun just a little bit because Calhoun does play a little bit of a role in this. Around 1800, Calhoun is founded as a little community on the southern part of what is today Mid County. But in 1800, it was still Cherokee land. We hadn't, the Hiawassee Purchase hadn't taken place yet. It was about 19 years in the future. And there were some low places in the river, and you could ford the river. And then the Cherokees began to get into the river ferry business. And that was something that a lot of Cherokees did. And I saw some research not long ago. You get a drink? Oh, give my wife a round of applause. But that was a big thing. They had river ferries on the Jellicoe River, on the Hiawassee River, and the Tennessee River. A lot of Cherokees got into the ferry business. And it made sense because as white folks were, remember, they were completely surrounded by white civilization, the Cherokee Nation was. And so there was a lot of commerce. White, instead of going around the Cherokee Nation, we could go through it, and which is why we have the old federal road, because the federal government contracted with the Cherokee Nation to build a road through the nation that could be used for commerce. And so as those roads crossed rivers, Cherokees got into the ferry business to be able to ferry people across the river. Not only themselves, but their white neighbors that they were doing business with. So Calhoun was one of those places. It's eventually, a little after 1817, obtained as a reservation. And in that treaty, the Cherokees had two options. This was a treaty that so Jackson was there, Governor McMinn was there, and then there was a Montgomery guy, I don't remember what his name was. But they negotiated with the Indians. They were trying to still encourage them to go out west. And so they gave them two options. If you go out west, we'll give you a blanket, a gun, and this and that to encourage you to go out there. And you can go out there and continue your lifestyle as a Native American, as an Indian. Or if you want to stay, then you become an American citizen, and we will give you a reservation of 1 square mile. That's 640 acres. and for you to farm, and you can adopt the white way of life, and you'll be a citizen like everybody else, and integrate into white society, and so on and so forth. And some Cherokees took that land. A lot of them did go ahead and begin to move out west, but a lot of them took the land. And we still today will come across things. I did a presentation on the Fort Loudon massacre in Loudon a couple of weeks ago. And that little field outside Telephone Plains where that took place at, the research shows that property was actually part of the Katie Harlan Reservation. And that was one of those reservations. Katie Harlan, I think, was a daughter of Nancy Ward. She was married to Ellis Harlan. There was a trader with the Cherokee. And her family wound up with that big piece of property up there on the Telephone River. So there were several reservations. The McIntosh Reservation was over just north of Athens. That was a family that was related to Nancy Ward. And there's some slight evidence that Nancy may have lived over there, about where the Scream Chamber house is, the old Clegg house. The Cleggs wound up buying that. They were either the next purchaser or maybe there was somebody between them and the McIntoshes that owned that property. So there's a little bit of evidence that Nancy may have lived over there before moving down to Woman Killer's Ford and passing away and being buried down there. So Walker, Major John Walker, winds up with this prime piece of real estate that would eventually be called Calhoun, but he called it Walker's Ferry after himself. He was the son of a white trader, and so he was a half-blood Cherokee. Very much a Cherokee, though, about everything that we read about him. He had been in part of Jackson's militia, the Cherokee militia that went down and fought at Horseshoe Bend. He's also mentioned in a battle that took place just outside of Nashville. And I can't remember the name of the little fort over there that was attacked, but he was one of the young Cherokees then. That's where he kind of starts turning up in the historical record. But over time, he gets all this property. He buys some additional property. He pretty much well owned everything that is Calhoun today. He's actually laid off the streets in the grid that they're in and began to sell off lots and to make it literally a little community. So in 1819, whenever the county is formed, and then in March of 1820, when we needed to go somewhere and literally set the government up in McMinn County, it's Major Walker's house in Calhoun that our county fathers go to, and they elect all the constitutional officers like sheriff. And for a while, he was on the county court, so he was actually one of our founding fathers of our county. And so he continues to be a very influential Cherokee for a good bit. He winds up not paying his bills like he should, and winds up getting a lot of lawsuits and losing a lot of his property. There is a story, our first sheriff, Spencer Beavers, who actually was sworn in there in Walker's home, goes down and tries to serve a paper on him and collect a debt. And Walker had a prize horse in his barn. And Sheriff Beavers went down there just to take the horse to select or to cover the debt. Walker didn't like that, pulled a knife on him, and tried to kill the sheriff, who, by the way, was a cripple. And so they had a big, these two old men basically had a big knockdown drag out. He almost killed the sheriff, but winds up not, luckily. But he fell on hard times after a while. So he winds up having a son about 1800. He has a son also named John Walker, but he went with the name Jack. And he grows up in and around Calhoun, and this is Calhoun today. Here's a couple of places that Walker had a ferry about right here, about where the railroad crosses today. There was another ferry just a little upstream. And then this is where Oostanaula Creek comes into the river. You know, there's a little dam there that there's been a lot of press about that TVA luckily decided not to remove because there is a lot of history there. But the Saw later on, the Saw family operated a big mill there. We have some pictures of it. But before that, Major Walker operated a mill there. And so he owned pretty much all of this property. He was very, very influential. And so was his son. His son winds up going to school out of state. I think he maybe went to a school in New Jersey. He comes back. Jack is a very handsome man. He must have been a pretty handsome man because he didn't have just one wife. He had two. He winds up marrying one of returned Jonathan Megg's daughters, Emily Stanfield Meggs, and then he marries a Cherokee woman, and that's not out of character in Cherokee culture at the time to have more than one spouse. So he had a white wife and he had a Cherokee consort or a Cherokee wife. He goes on down into the nation and builds a very fine 2-story log house that I've got some pictures of that we still have. And this house, just to give you a point of reference, because a lot of the stories will take place there. This house set right across Highway 11 in present-day Cleveland, right across from the Walmart. Okay? There's a sign there. You may have seen it. There is a tire store there today, about where his house set. And he had a big fine house there, a big fine farm, but that was where he lived when all this goes down that we're going to talk about. Now, there will be a big case that comes up, but I want to look at a couple of things here just to bring your attention. So, there have been all kinds of litigation over Native American issues for a long time. They've been suing or been sued by different states and other people trying to take their land or to do different things. And I want to point out just a couple of significant decisions. These are not all of them. But notice how many times that Judge John Catherine's name comes up, because he's going to play a role in all this. Well, the first one is the Cornett versus Wintons lease. Judge called John Catherine in the Tennessee Supreme Court. This is 1826. He writes the decision. He acknowledged the rights which the courts of justice are bound to regard. He acknowledged the rights of Cherokees. Then there's Blair versus Path Killers lease. This Tennessee Supreme Court. Again, Judge John Catherine upholds Cherokee property rights. Does it sound like this guy is for the Indians? Yes, very much so. Judge Haywood, one of his fellow judges on the Tennessee Supreme Court, said the Cherokees are yet an independent nation. That's important. They're yet an independent nation, subject to laws made by themselves. And we know at the time of the removal, they had a courthouse, they had a constitution, they had their own newspaper, they had a government. They adopted all of this themselves, and these court cases, like Holland versus Pack right there, these judges are supporting that, specifically John Catherine. Then Worcester versus Georgia in 1832 invalidated some of Georgia state's jurisdiction over Cherokee land. That was a big thing. Georgia was trying to pass a lot of laws to be able to just seize Cherokee land. And this is the United States Supreme Court. Overruled that. Justice Marshall held that the Cherokee Nation was a distinctive community. What he's saying is they are sovereign. They are a sovereign nation. They get to make their own laws, they get to make their own decisions. They're a sovereign nation that the United States and every state where they live, is mostly Georgia and Tennessee at the time, every state that surrounds them, they are a sovereign nation, a distinctive community, occupying its own territory with boundaries. The citizens of Georgia have no right to enter. They have a border, and they recognize that. And the treaties with the United States were recognized. So as we know, within the Cherokee Nation, you had a largely full-blood group who were very spiritually connected to the land. And they wanted to stay. They really didn't want to leave. Now that's not to say that every single full-blood wanted to stay and didn't want to move. There were some full-blooded people that went out west. But a majority of the ones that wanted to stay were full-blood Cherokees. They didn't care anything about the offers that were made to go out and get free land and all the benefits that the government wanted to give them. The removal party, the treaty party were the ones that wanted to make treaties and stay. The removal party were mostly mixed bloods. They were Cherokees who had integrated into the Walkers were some of them, that had integrated into the white society. They had learned the value of land ownership. They were farming. Some of them, many of them, owned slaves. They had their own businesses. They had river ferries. They learned the value of a dollar. And so when the government says, we'll give you free land, well, that resonated with people like that. Oh, well, then we'll give all this up. We'll take whatever annuity or whatever that we can get out of the federal government. Sure, we'll move out west. And so they were largely the ones who were of the removal faction, the removal party, were mostly mixed blood Cherokees, just like the Walkers, and in fact, they were part of that. So, again, I've kind of already talked about Jack Walker, born there on the Hiwassee River, son of Major John Walker. Two wives, Emma Stanfield Meggs and Nancy Bushy Head, his Cherokee wife. I already told you where he built his house, what a good-looking guy he was. There's a picture, some pictures of that two-story home that's set there across from Walmart, and that's what it looks like today. That entire store sits there. Walmart sits over here if you're going north on Key Street. But that's, you really can't see it, but the historical marker is right in here somewhere that tells some of the story. So, Walker winds up, remember he was a mover and a shaker. He's a young man. He comes from a very affluent family. So, of course, he is able to rise up in the Cherokee government and becomes a sheriff or a constable, some sort of a law enforcement official within the Cherokee Nation. And so one day, in 1825, he intercepts a load of liquor, because that was illegal. He intercepts it down here on the Conasauga River, being illegally smuggled into the Cherokee Nation by another mixed blood Cherokee, James Foreman. And Foreman did not appreciate his. It's odd that people don't appreciate the liquor thing. It's weird the same things happen to him. He was taking his illicit liquor, and Foreman said, "By what authority do you have to make this arrest and seizure?" And the story goes that Walker pulled his pistol out and said, "By God, this authority." And so from then on, even way back then, Walker and James Foreman didn't like each other. Okay? They did not like each other. This was a 9 or 10 year feud that these two guys had. And Foreman later on himself rises up kind of through the Cherokee government and becomes a Cherokee official himself. So the Cherokees had a blood law that no Cherokee could sell tribal land without facing the penalty of death. And it was an old law. It was culturally part. It was an unwritten law even. It had been with them before they ever formed their own government. So, as we get into the 1820s and 1830s, and you have presidents and government officials in Washington wooing Native American tribes to come up to Washington and treat with them. Of course, they feed them and take care of them and pet them because they wanted to run them over and try to get them to sell their land. So when that would happen, the people back home would start, of course, to get suspicious. Number one, they weren't getting to go to Washington and be petted and fed and took care of and get all the little gifts that these other guys were getting. So they didn't like that, and they didn't like the fact that that guy is up there selling their land. And that's illegal, and he could die for that. So Walker goes up and meets with James Starr, one of Caleb Starr's sons that our mountain over here is named after. Goes up there in 1832 and meets President Jackson, and of course the rumor gets started. Well, they went up there and signed their land away, so people start whispering around about, well, maybe they need to die for that. Well, they come back. We didn't sell any land. They would feed themselves. And, that's not what we just went up there to treat with Jackson. Well, they go back the following year. And again, people start to be suspicious. He goes a third time. The very next year, 1934, he goes this time with David Van. And he starts to get the attention of both leaders of these parties. John Ross led the treaty party, the ones that want to stay, and Major Ridge was one of the main leaders of the removal party. And neither one of them really appreciated what Jack Walker was doing. They kind of felt like he was kind of looking out for his own interest. He just going up there to have a good time and get fed by the federal government, by Jackson. And neither one of them really. Neither one of them endorsed him, and neither one of them seemed to appreciate it. So he was starting to alienate himself as we get into 1834. So here's what happens. So in August of 1834, there's a big council down at Red Clay. And here's where, it was during this council, that these two factions already existed, the removal guys and the treaty guys. But it was at this council that they really did split up. I mean, it was a definite split. So much so, and this went on for 3 or 4 days, so much so that they began to threaten each other. So Foreman is there with his half-brother, Addison, and sometimes it's written as Isaac Springston. So you got James Foreman, Addison Springston are both there. Walker is there. Walker's there with a man from Athens named Dick Jackson. And so they're down there, and of course they're on opposite sides, and they're giving each other grief. And Foreman makes some pretty foul threats against the removal party and sort of aims everything toward Walker. So Walker leaves the council early. So you got to know, Red Clay is kind of down on the edge of Tennessee, right on the Tennessee-Georgia line, South Bradley County. So, or Bradley County today. So it's not that far for Walker to just ride north and go back to his house, but that's not what he does. He knew that his life was in danger. So he and Dick Jackson get on their horse and they go down into Georgia. They go down south to Joseph Vans, and I'll show you a map of their route here in just a minute. But that was down, of course, in Chatsworth, just outside Chatsworth. They go down there, they visit with Joseph Van, they turn and come north on the Old Federal Road. When the Spring Place Road hits Old Federal, they turn there. And then they took this big long route to get back to his house. And so there it is. So that's Cleveland today up there. Here's Dalton, and here's Chatsworth. So there's Red Clay right on the state line. So they come south, past Barnell, and come over here to Vans. And then they turn north of the Old Federal Road, and then when they get right here, they turn northwest, and they're going up there about where the point of the arrow is about where Walker's house would be. So that's where they're headed. If something happens right there, you see the little orange mark, something happens right there. That's kind of where our story will take a turn here. Okay. So here's Spring Place. Can you see that? It's not a very good slide. I don't make very good picture slides. So there's Spring Place Road, going up through Bradley County. This is today the Cedar Springs community along Spring Place Road. That's going up toward Cleveland. So of course, Cleveland don't exist at this point, but they're riding up Spring Place Road. At the time, Cedar Springs was not called Cedar Springs. It was called Muskrat Springs because there was a Cherokee named Muskrat that operated a sort of a little way house there, a little boarding house. And so this is all what I'm telling you comes from the court testimony after the fact of all this happening. So Jackson, Dick Jackson and Jack Walker, they're riding up through here, and they get up here to around Muskrats. Dick Jackson would say later that as they're riding, that someone called to them from Muskrat's place and said, "Hey, do you gentlemen have any tobacco?" And so Walker rides over, and he spends a few minutes with them. Jackson said that Walker rode back, and he had a funny look on his face. And as they turned to go on up Spring Place, he said that Walker looked at him and said, "I felt like some of those men meant to kill me." And so they didn't really think much of it. And so they kept riding their horses. And if you can, you see the little pin that I've got dropped up there? You might be able to barely see. So the old road makes a little dog leg where the present road goes straight. Can you see that? So that dog leg is 1 mile. That little curve is 1 mile from about where Muskrat's place was. Because the court testimony would later say 1 mile from Muskrat's place, Muskrat Springs, is where this takes place. So they're riding up the road, and quite suddenly, from behind a large tree, 2 men rise up, armed, and fire a long gun, a rifle or musket, striking Jack Walker in the left chest. Both Walker and Dick Jackson identified, guess who? James Foreman and Addison Springston are the assailants. This is in the middle of the day. So they said that Foreman and Springston run away. I've always been impressed with how tough that Jack Walker must have been, because these are pictures. This is the split. This is where the new road goes around. Here's where the old road is called Shope Road today. And then this photograph is where the curve is. And like I say, it's 1 mile from Muskrat's, where Muskrat's was. So if we have, this is why I like this. This kind of puts in my law enforcement, crime scene reconstruction stuff together with my interest in history. Because what you're looking at is a crime scene 180, 90 years ago. So based on what we read about in the court record, this is where the murder, he didn't die there, but the fatal wounding when the ambush took place. And so, again, I've always been impressed with Jack Walker, because from that curve to his house, where it is today, and I know this because I drove it and measured it, it's 14 miles. So he got back up on his horse with if there's any medical people in the room, you know what a second chest wound is? And second don't mean it's sucked to have it. It means it's literally your air is getting sucked in your body as you're trying to breathe. And your chest cavity will fill up with air and cause a pneumothorax and push your lungs over the deviate your trachea. I mean, this is nasty stuff. But this guy rides 14 miles like that to his house and still doesn't die. He collapses in his house. His wife takes him inside. He lives another 11 days in very, very much pain. But he is able to again tell who shot him until he gets so weak from infection and loss of blood, and he passes away there in that big 2-story log house right across the road from the present Walmart. I always think it's interesting that Indians built so close to Walmart. They just knew. So he dies there in the house. His father is still living at the time, because he does show up in some of the court records. And Major Walker is an old man, but he blames John Ross. He thinks because Springston and Foreman are part of that party, that's what drove them to kill his son, and maybe it was. It could have been the liquor that he took from him about 10 years earlier, but obviously they were politically opposed to each other as far as the future of their people went. So he was blaming John Ross. He was so intent on killing John Ross that John Ross actually posted guards at his house. And they said that they could hear the old man out in the woods moving around. I mean, they were that terrified of him that he might actually make do on that promise to kill John Ross. He doesn't, of course, do it. So there's a big investigation they call a coroner's inquest. And if you've read anything from years ago, you know that was a pretty standard practice. Whereas today we'll go in and we'll close off the crime scene and we'll call in our investigators and collect evidence. It's purely a law enforcement driven machine that processes a crime scene. But back then they would call a coroner's inquest, and sometimes it took days. Because they couldn't just drive, 15 minutes to get to a crime scene. It takes them a while to get packed up, and you couldn't just call everybody. You had to reach out and ride in different places. And they had to get the coroner, they had to get the sheriff. Then they would just basically select a an impromptu jury of just citizens, and they would go to the crime scene and look it over and see what they could find. If there was a body there, they would go, and that's how they pronounced people dead back then. And they would go view the body and see if they could, in their primitive ways, to collect what evidence that they could find in the primitive way that they did it, collect whatever statements they could of witnesses, and that's how they made their cases back then. So they call a coroner's inquest. They go down to the tree. They find a shoe print that they measure it, and in their scientific way of doing it, decide what size it is. And then it's a man's footprint, off in the direction that Springsteen foreman were seen running. On top of the fact that they have the eyewitness accounts, but they collect these statements from Muskrat's people and from Dick Jackson. Of course, they were able to talk to Jack Walker before he dies, and so they are able to indict James Foreman in Addison, Springsteen, in McMinn County Court. Sheriff Spencer Beavers is still the sheriff. He was actually our longest serving sheriff. He served until 1842. If I get one more term, I'll be the second one. That's a little free little thing for you. Just think about that when you go to vote. You be part of history. Sheriff Beavers goes down, finds Foreman in Springsteen, arrests him, and brings him back to Athens. Now, the jail then was in Knight Park. And the best we can tell was the original jail was in this area of Knight Park, kind of on the side here that faces over toward, this is the north end of Knight Park. I'm driving down White Street here off of Depot Hill, coming up on Knight Park there. And so we're kind of right behind that sign. There was a primitive little jail there. Back then, that was outside the city limits. Athens city limits did start to get all the way to the end of what is presently the park at College Street. And the jail was kind of a nasty place. That's kind of why they put it outside the city limits. But anyway, that's where they held Foreman in Springsteen, and they set a trial to come up and back then it was a pretty speedy trial. They were going to try them that fall. So, while they're being held, and while they're trying to pick juries, those two scoundrels escape. And there's the newspaper editorial offering a $50 reward for the return, and it gives a little bit of a description. They're natives of the Cherokee Nation, where they will no doubt attempt to conceal themselves. They're both large, dark half-breeds. Foreman is very tall and rather a slender man. Springsteen is not so tall and is heavy and stout built. And John Austin, who was the McMinn County jailer at the time, puts that reward out there for their rearrest, which they are caught again and brought back to jail. As best I can tell, Spencer Beavers had something to do with that too, and puts them back in jail, and then they are set for court there in 1835. That happened in March when they escaped. And so they, let me see. No, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. They don't escape until after court. So here's how it played out. They go to court on this murder trial, murder charge, and their defense, their attorney Spencer Jarnigan says, maybe they did kill somebody, maybe a murder did occur, but when it occurred, everything south of the Hiwassee River is the Cherokee Nation. We've already seen all these court cases that made them literally an independent country. So he said, if a crime did occur, it occurred outside the limits of Tennessee and outside the limits of the United States of America. So these gentlemen cannot be tried or charged in this court. They'll have to be tried and charged in a Cherokee court. Does that make sense? Sure it does. Judge Keith, who heard the case, agreed. That's true. Okay, we got I've showed you some court cases already that he no doubt looked back and looked at those precedents and said, yes, all these court cases, our Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court has recognized the autonomy of these people. They're able to make their own laws. They can have their own courts. So he remanded that back to the Cherokee courts and dismisses the charge. But Samuel Frazier was the DA. He didn't see it that way. So he appeals for a hearing in front of the Supreme Court of Tennessee that would take place the following summer in Knoxville. That's when they put Foreman and Springston back in jail, and that's when they escaped. It's actually after the initial trial. So they come back, then they are able to make bond, and so they get out. And everybody's set to go to Knoxville and appear before the Tennessee Supreme Court. The following summer, in 1835. So, at that session of the Tennessee Supreme Court, there were supposed to be 4 justices that were supposed to meet. Catron, we've already talked about, remember who did he always decide on the side of? Cherokee. Yes, always. And I'll just give you a few in this case. So Catron is on the Supreme Court, Judge Green, Justice Peck, Justice White was not there, and I don't really know why. So there's 3 of them that are going to hear this case. They hear the case, and Judge John Catron, who had always ruled on the side of the Native Americans, suddenly switches gears. And he writes a lengthy opinion that we still have today. And basically says that when European explorers like Christopher Columbus set foot in the New World, they brought with them all of the authority of Europe and all the European powers and European countries. As that authority transferred through the colonialization and then the nationalization of the United States, that power passed on to the United States federal government and the states. And so basically he says that this principle declared in the 5th century in the laws of Christendom that discovery gave title to assume sovereignty over and to govern the unconverted neighbors, neither our theory nor practice has ever allowed to the Indians any political right extending beyond our pleasure. Basically saying, you don't exist on your own. You are not sovereign. He had never, in his judicial career, ever said anything like this. Peck was the dissenting judge. He wrote a little dissenting opinion, but Green and Catron were the ones that said that you're not sovereign. You have no government. You have no legal system except the state of Tennessee. And they remanded the trial be held back in county again and retried as it was initially tried to be tried in the state of Tennessee's courts there in Athens. But there are no records that it was ever heard, because 1835, of course, is when, that December, when the removal treaty is signed and the Trail of Tears begins. So there was a judge from McMinn County, Theodore Brown. He's since passed away. He's Dr. Brown's brother, if you know Dr. Brown. He did some fantastic research that I'm sharing with you. That's where we got the majority of this. He helped write a book about 20 years ago called The History of the Tennessee Supreme Court, and he talks about this particular case. And he did more research on it really than anybody that I know of. But he said it was never heard again. And it was his opinion that the Cherokees realized, among other things, that they literally did not have a legal leg to stand on anymore. Their government was no longer recognized. Their courts were no longer recognized. They had no choice but to sign the removal treaty. Now, that didn't mean that everybody agreed with that, but a large enough group of Cherokees that were influential enough to read the writing on the wall, whether it served their purpose and they wanted to remove, and they were like, oh, this is a good reason to do what I want to do and get all the people out here, go out here and get all this free land the federal government's giving, or that they just realized we have no other recourse. And if you think about it, the federal government really needs things like this to happen. When there have been some things go on with our federal government throughout our 250-year history, they're usually to get something to happen. There's got to be some kind of legal precedent that the government can point to and say, well, we're doing this because this court case over here, or this happened, or whatever. And that's what this case did. It took away the sovereignty of the Cherokees and opened the door for Jackson's removal policy to take place. So, I hope that you're thinking about this. And you're thinking about John Catron. Why, oh why, did he change his opinion? Why would this judge, who always ruled on the side of the Indians, change his opinion? Here's something Theodore Brown said. Catron viewed the case as providing an opportunity to facilitate the success of President Andrew Jackson's popular removal policy at a crucial time during pending treaty negotiations with Cherokee. Well, it wasn't that convenient. That right at this critical time, when they're really putting the pressure on the removal, that this murder case comes up. The defense says, well, you can't try us in your courts because the Cherokee nation is sovereign and we've got our own courts. Oh, no, you don't, says Judge Catron. Now, did that come from him? Why would he suddenly decide? Because this was nothing new. Jackson's been around a while. The idea of removal has been around a while. Why did Catron suddenly decide that this was a good idea? Well, look who gets appointed to the United States Supreme Court on the very last day that Andrew Jackson is in office. Judge John Catron. And he serves many, many years until his death about 30 years later in 1865. He would be one of the judges that would side with the majority in the Dred Scott decision that had a lot to do with upholding slavery. He was not a very fine Christian man. As you can see, the only child he ever had, he fathered with one of his slaves. Not a nice guy. And you see, sort of, if you know your history, you know Jackson almost got elected. The term before he did get elected. In fact, he wins the popular vote. Where's Charlie at? Was that 1828, Charlie? Is that right? Somebody tell me I'm right. Yes. If it's not, I'll say it is. So yes, he wins the popular vote. He goes to the United States House of Representatives, and they decide the outcome of the presidential election. Well, there's Henry Clay, and he don't like Jackson, so he supposedly forms a little machine and basically gets the vote to swing, and John goes out and winds up being president. And Jackson raised Cain about that. And if you remember, there was a quote that he had. It was a corrupt bargain. A corrupt bargain that was struck because all of these things happened, and Kentucky got out good on it because of all these corrupt bargains to get the vote right. Well, who strikes a corrupt bargain here? Jackson got his way because he was able to basically promise the judge, if you'll decide on this the right way, there's a Supreme Court seat waiting on you. And that's a life appointment, as you can see. So the evidence is clearly there that Catron and Jackson were in cahoots to make this happen. So over time, of course, Walker's family winds up removing, and they sell their land. They sell that big farm. But the house is actually there. That big 2-story log house is there until about 1909. And then somebody tears it down, and somebody else builds this big white wooden structure that's there until the 1960s, I think. But people remember this story. And so in the 1930s, the DAR puts this big marker up, and a couple of us were talking out in the lobby. This is about the same time. If you've been to the Dancy Ward Memorial, it looks very similar to this. It's made out of river stone, and then there's a sort of stone plaque in the middle of it. There was another one that was put up about the same time in northern McMinn County at Isaac Lane's grave, the patriot Isaac Lane. But this is one that the DAR put up there at the site of Walker's house and his grave to remember him and remember the history around Jack Walker and this murder case and his murder. So that big monument is there for like 30 years until Highway 11 is widened. and like a lot of stuff, gets destroyed and isn't put back up. The site of the grave is lost. And for a long time, nobody knew for sure what had happened to it. So I'm giving this presentation. The first time I actually gave it was about 6 or 7 years ago. And so I ended it with the lost grave. We really don't know where it's at. And it's very sad. It was a Trail of Tears event at Cleveland State. And all these ladies, and if you know those ladies that are in the Trail of Tears Association, they will fight over anything that they were passionate about. And so when I started saying, we really don't know where Walker is buried. Well, by the end of this presentation, they have fallen in love with Jack Walker. And it really unnerved them that we don't know where he's buried and how sad that is. So, some of them decided they were going to go and get them some dowsing rods with somebody that knows how to douse graves and walk that property. And lo and behold, here's kind of what they found. So this is the site. This is the tire store. There's a drugstore out here today. Nothing but cakes is right up here. Here's the parking lot around the tire store. There's Highway 11. Walmart's parking lot's up there. So as they're walking this property, unlike me, they weren't trespassing, they got permission. They're walking the property, and they actually described this to me. They're walking around, and they get right here as you step off the concrete onto the pavement, and the dowsing rods go whoop across. And they found a single grave. Now, I've never done grave dowsing. I know a lot. This is an accepted scientific way to find graves, by the way. It is not witchcraft. There's something about the magnetism with remains. I don't know how it works, but they actually teach it at the Forensic Center in Knoxville to actually do this. There is a PhD that wrote a dissertation about how well this works. And people who really know how to do it can tell you if it is a male or a female grave.
Wow.
Yeah, whoa. So whoever was doing this with them, and I don't remember who they said, these are some friends of mine, the ladies of the group, but they said, this so-and-so was one of those people that can do it and know if it's male or female. Well, it's a male grave. Right there behind, about where Walker's house was. So we think that the house sat right out here about in front of the tire store, that the road would have been out in here further out. That's why when they widened it, they tore the monument down. And the records indicated that Walker was buried behind his house in a garden. Well, that single grave would be behind his house, where the house of Walker stood. Now, they did continue to walk the property and found 3 more graves back here: an adult male, a child, I think a female child, and another female. So, kind of in a corner back there, but nothing but cakes. I told this story Tuesday night at the Cleveland, what's the name of that stadium? Spirit Legends of the Lord. And I told part of this story, not everything you're getting, but we were talking about graves. And I said, as they walked over to nothing but cakes and found these 3 more graves, and I ended my story by saying, because in that parking lot, it's nothing but graves. So, they got a kick out of that. So, we think that those ladies have looked, there's no mark or anything at the private property, but not finding anything else and knowing what the historical record tells us about where it's buried and how it was buried, they think that they probably have located where Walker's resting place is. Unfortunately, it is in a parking lot of a tire store, but nevertheless, it's more or less something we know. So that's the story of the court case, its implications. And like I say, just like the volcano, it was just something that happened that may have been inconsequential at the time, but led to really big, it literally led to one of the darkest times in our history. And enabled the federal government to actually put enough pressure on the Cherokee between the corn debt and the instability that was still going on 10 years after that, those bad winters. They were still suffering because of all of their lack of food. They were having literally some physical breakdowns in society and in our government. And then you get this court case pop up that says you don't even have a government. You don't have anything. You don't have court. You don't have laws. You fall under the United States of America and the state of Tennessee. And what's worse, they fell under the state of Georgia. So that eventually repealed everything that Georgia was trying to, that had been overruled, that Georgia had been trying to do. And so they ramped up their activities on it too. So you can kind of see how that was able to play out there with this court case. So any questions?
Are you going to turn this into a book about Walker?
So, so here's my friend Troy. I'm glad you asked. Here's my friend Troy Wayne Petit. Troy Wayne is a former judge on the Cherokee Supreme Court. He's an attorney. He's also a former member of the legislature out in the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma. We got to be really good friends because we didn't even know each other, and people were running back and forth between Tennessee and Oklahoma, running into each of us, and people were coming back going, "You look just like Troy Wayne Petit." And they're going after Troy, going, "You look just like our sheriff, Joe Guy." So we finally get together, and I tell people, I say, "Yeah, they say that I look like Troy." You know, Troy's a really good-looking guy. So we got to be really good friends, and I think that was at the Cleveland event that I was telling you about speaking at. And old Troy did me one up and brought me a Cherokee turban to wear that day, so we really looked a lot alike. But we sometimes do a joint presentation about all of the different causes. Brett Riggs has done an amazing amount of research. Brett is head of Cherokee Studies at Western Carolina University, and has done some fantastic research on the volcano, among other things. But he has that call for the removal. He's done a lot of work, and some of the stuff I was telling you came directly from Brett's research. So what I would like to do to answer your question is for me and Troy to write a book. I would love to, and I pitched that to him, and he's kind of thinking about it right